So I am really excited to be here, and there are several reasons for that. And if I go through with those reasons, I'll probably be ostracized from the architectural community, but I am going to do that all the same. So to begin with, Rajesh, the Kyoorius team, I've spoken at a fair number of places around the world. This is without doubt not one, but the best organized, the best curated event I have ever attended. Animesh, don't start my timer yet. It is without doubt the most caring and the most efficient technical crew I have ever met, animation crew. A big hand for them. And last but not the least, I was speaking at an architectural conference yesterday in Bombay. I spoke at an architectural conference this morning in Goa. And I can let you in on a secret why I'm really excited to be here. Because all the people in this room are at least twice as good looking as any architectural conference. And at least 5 times more stylish. And definitely 100 times more energy and love in the room. So hands out to you. So thank you all for giving me your time and your listening. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge all our collaborators because our work, is a lot of their work as well. Landscape architects, structural engineers, MEP and sustainability consultants, all our vendors and artisans. Of course, our team members and collaborators, past and present. And most importantly, our clients, without whom none of this work would exist. So I represent Studio Lotus. Currently, we're a team of about 110 working out of our studio in New Delhi. And even as we enter the 22nd year of our practice, we still start each day slightly unsure, slightly unsteady, as we navigate our way through projects of different scales and complexity, from hotels, museums, and institutions to small homes, restaurants, and bars. But what I'd like to lean in today is the why and how of what we do. As our practice reshapes itself to changing external conditions, such as clients, budgets, and what have you, there is an underlying set of design values that we believe speaks to the changing needs of the vast diversity of India, guiding principles that in some way address not only environmental concerns that Rajesh was speaking of, but equally the sustainability of our social and cultural context. Before I do that, I'd like to go a little deeper into understanding our country. We occupy only about 2.4% of the world's landmass and yet have more than half of the globe's climatic zones. What that means is we generate 21 agroecological regions within the country, which in turn creates amongst the most diverse regional cuisines in the world, based entirely on local and seasonal produce. We have over 2,000 documented craft forms still alive, even though a lot of them are rapidly dying. According to different sources, we have hundreds of living languages and thousands of dialects. In short, we are many countries in one. But why is all this important? Our traditional lifestyles, by the way, which a lot of them are still vibrant and alive, are based on strong regional response, where people live in harmony with their context. Richly diverse cultures which are highly local, impacting language, food, clothing, and of course, building. A few examples, such as this in Kerala on the southern coast, with its hot and humid climate, where people's clothing is as porous and ventilated as the buildings they inhabit. The food they eat promotes cooling in the body, and most population still lives comfortably without any air conditioning. Or then here in the Himalayan desert of Ladakh, with its cold and dry climate, where the high thermal mass of the mud walls and small windows and the yak wool and fur clothing keeps people warm with very little artificial heating, while the salt butter tea keeps the skin supple and hydrated. Or then the western hot and dry deserts of Kutch and Rajasthan, where straw bale roofs and adobe walls of the buildings and layers of white hand-spun cotton on people keeps the coolth in and the heat out, as the spicy food keeps the sweat glands active. And in the past few decades, India is rapidly on the road to development, becoming globalized, causing a homogenization of our aspirations as the global south seeks to play catch-up with the global north. In our buildings, our food, our clothing, right down to the standards of comfort we aspire for, readily discarding indigenous wisdom imbibed over centuries. What then can we do differently? Can we find ways to interpret the wisdom that surrounds us in a way that speaks to our collective futures? In our own small way, we have tried to do this through a set of values that have more emerged and shaped our work than been created over the past few years. We have always been a country of frugal means of doing more with less. How do we build in a way that keeps the handmade relevant at increasingly larger scales? How do we keep our solutions forward-looking yet simple and passive for ease of access to a larger audience, looking beyond just preserving built historic structures and increasingly adapting ordinary structures for their embodied carbon? What does it take to do buildings that endure, not just in material and form, but in people's imagination, for the inherent meaning they embody? A lot of our clients are H&I and luxury brands. Can we reframe what luxury means using local materials and processes, and elevate these instead with a high degree of craftsmanship? Last but not the least, weave all of this together as a work of poetry that inspires us and those around us. I'm going to take you through a few examples of how we've attempted to address some of these questions. One of our earliest projects 18 years ago was a small store for a leading Indian fashion designer at a luxury mall in New Delhi. This mall was the first home to the then new to India foreign luxury brands. These stores adjoining ours had budgets for interior fit-outs that were close to 10 times as much as what we were given. And not only that, we had only 2 months to design and execute the store in. We took inspiration from Rajesh's design approach of using handcrafted techniques to create texture on simple materials, and used a small team of ordinary welders, much like Rajesh uses his tailors, to create texture and pattern. They hand-welded 12,000 locally sourced scissors into 14 different patterns onto metal pipe frames made off-site, which were then assembled on-site and inserted into the whitewashed bare walls of the store. The air conditioning and electricals ran outside of this lattice cube. The clothes were framed by this lace-like filigree. As you can see in the image on the right, the imperfections of the hand welding only added to the tactility of the space. Not only was the project delivered on time and budget, but also became a celebration of the client's brand philosophy using a frugal handmade approach. Thank you. We scaled this understanding to a different level when we had the opportunity of working for a client building a boutique hotel that later spread its reach across various parts of the country. The first of these was on a site in the walled city of Jodhpur in Rajasthan, on a 6,000 square meter plot with 3 derelict 17th century buildings on it, as you can see in the image on the left. Access to the site was through these narrow lanes inaccessible by construction trucks. The lanes brought us to this old gate, which opened onto this spectacular view. The 3 old buildings had been modified over time by multiple families living there, which had left them with very little semblance of the original architecture. The business plan demanded 40 guest rooms. Our site plan looked at restoring the 3 old buildings as anchors, housing the public spaces, the restaurant, pool, spa, and lounges. with the rooms built around them as 3 new structures. Thus, the first block becomes the second gateway to the site after the main gate, and the rear 2 blocks become the canvas for the 3 historic buildings, all visually connected to the fort. We identified in the old buildings what could be removed, peeling away layers of paint and cement, removing arbitrary interventions that had been made by the families living there over time, restoring traditional details in stone and lime mortar until the jewel-like forms of these historic buildings emerged from within and started reconnecting their shared history in conversation with the fort. The second, more challenging part was designing the new blocks using traditional materials but in a contemporary idiom. These buildings had to be west-facing because of their views to the fort. We designed them as double-skinned structures with naturally ventilated verandas and corridors, buffering the air-conditioned rooms from the heat like the traditional Jaroka structures of the region. The fort-facing balcony had to have openable stone shutters, and we needed to limit the weight. They needed to be only 20 millimeters thick. We wanted to reference the traditional facade forms of the site using the traditional patterns, but it wasn't possible to hand-cut these onto such thin a stone without it cracking. The only way to do this would have been to use a water-jet CNC cutting machine. However, we chose to stay authentic to the process and instead simplified the form to a simple graded perforation that could be hand-cut on these slabs that were procured from a local quarry 10 kilometers away. The shutters that you see in the video are fabricated by local welders and stonemasons. They weigh 420 kilos and continue to work smoothly 15 years later, operated by one person. These not only become part of the balconies, but also the naturally ventilated circulation spaces, negotiating privacy and transparency, infusing the new blocks with a changing quality of light and shadow cast by the sharp desert sun through different times of the day. As guests play with the facade, it changes through the day, and in the night, the stone filigree feels like fabric as the 3 new buildings become lanterns framing the site. To breathe life into the smooth quarry-cut sandstone slabs, we turned to the craftsmen at site and over multiple prototypes generated hand-chiseled patterns at site, which translated on the surface you see on the left, which are 50 millimeters thick, 3-meter high solid stone partitions that divide the bathroom from the room, as you can see in the image on the right, and on the solid stone hand-cut perforated headboards, which also serve as a nightlight. The project works on creating a conscious dialogue between the old and the new, as it seeks to create a seamless experience of history and the present. We realized that if we are truly to create something authentic that adds value to the project and all the stakeholders that work on it, then we need to go beyond the visual form and stay true to the value and the process we espouse. A happy coincidence when we started rationalizing our work much later, we found that aside from the value it added to the stonemason's craft, and of course the organic feeling that the handmade can give, the embodied carbon in this is nearly 1/5 as much as a panel done by a water-jet cut machine. Another key learning for us was that to tap into this hidden potential, we needed to move beyond the comfort of our drawing boards and computers, trust the process and the wisdom of artisans and other stakeholders at site, and engage with them to co-author the final outcome. I'll take you now to a totally different context for the same client to build a 40-room hotel near Dharamshala, way up north, the home of the Dalai Lama, a project that's still under construction, with spectacular views of the Dhauladars to the north and the tea-growing valley to the south. The architecture here takes a totally different form while celebrating the brand's values. So we moved away from the idea, this was meant to be a resort, and we moved away from the idea of multiple cottages, which fragments the guest experience, and also increases infrastructure, energy, and creates servicing and circulation challenges. We instead extruded the section of one cottage across the contour of the entire hill to create a single 220-meter long building, which was two-storied with 40 suites. So the red vertical spines that you see here are individual staircases that lead to the suites, which are the yellow band above and below the blue band, which is at the ground level, which houses all the public amenities such as the kitchens, restaurants, and spa. This way, the rooms have no corridor on either side and have private balconies on both sides to enjoy uninterrupted views of the mountains on the north and the valley on the south. And while you're in the room, you see no built structure. The building is inspired and formed by the powerful yet silent rhythm of a Buddhist monastery, and the materiality is derived from the local village homes and temples of the region. We used waste slate from local quarries that villagers usually build their boundary walls with. We were able to elevate this humble material into a luxurious expression with the same group of masons who had worked with us in Rajasthan, who came over, collaborated with local Himachali masons to build this sweeping form, which is over 200 meters in length with its thick masonry walls that give the building thermal mass for the solar-powered underfloor radiant heating, and also gives it its timeless expression that captures the rhythm and the materiality that we sought to express. This is a view of the building as it peels away from the sloping hills and sits against the mountains. Here again, engaging deeply with the site and local material and skill spoke to our aspiration of giving a timeless expression that situates itself somewhere between the contemporary and the vernacular. The third hotel for the same client, again in a different context, between Jodhpur and Jaipur in Rajasthan, on an 800-acre rewilded private forest with a 200-year-old rainwater check dam on which the original owners used to run a 12-tented property, which was seasonal only for the winter. Business became unviable, and our RAS clients entered into a JV with the family and converted it into a perennial property. We opted for a simple curvilinear plan, as you can see in the drawing. This upped the room count to 16, with the public amenities at the far right corner, which could be serviced independently without disrupting the rooms. The section shows how we sunk the guest circulation below the west side of the dam so that guests had uninterrupted private verandas towards both the lake facing sunrise and forest facing sunsets. Due to the fragile nature of the 200-year-old dam, we needed to create a building that was almost as light as the original tents and used almost no concrete. We had only 8 months to build out the project and designed a light foundation system of precast hewn pipes which were filled with stone and lime mortar, mounted a lightweight framework for all the tents, which allowed us to run all the engineering services floating below the elevated floor, and did not need to dig the topsoil, the very sensitive topsoil of the dam. The roof is a double-layered waterproof heat-reflecting canvas skin that creates shaded overhangs on either side. So that is the sunken path to approach the rooms. You move up and enter the tent as the lake gets revealed, taking forward the idea of unfolding thresholds from the previous properties. For the tent-inspired textile interior, we worked with printmaker Dhwani Behel from Delhi, who spent weeks on site sketching the flora and fauna of the region and innovated on the block printing craft of the region by interpreting her sketches onto these really large 6 to 8 feet tall wooden blocks, which she hand-printed the linen for the tents with. These then were further hand-embroidered with migratory birds and animals that come to site. We then took the same narrative into the furniture, such as the hand-carved casings for the air conditioning units on the floor, custom designed the camp-style furniture in native kikar wood, all of which come together as happy surprises of varying compositions. On the left image, a private sit-out towards the forest, which is where you enter from. In the middle, a skylight that lets in winter sun and frames the brilliant night sky over the bed. And to the right, doors that open to your private veranda on the lake, from where you can step down into a private garden. And as you move onto the lake in a boat, you see the building lightly perched on the dam, and towards the far right, you see the reception, bar, and restaurant. This is inspired by the traditional pavilions of the region as a singular building, which is lightly perched off the dam again, with a wraparound deep veranda that overlooks the pool on the sunken side of the dam, which cascades down into a restored stepwell, which is also the entry plaza. The construction system here uses no concrete, is a composite of hand-carved regional sandstone clamped onto steel frameworks, and where people touch the stone, it has a hand-chiseled texture. To the right, we can see the air conditioning grills being hand-cut at site. This is how the building sits on the dam, the veranda with its sunrise view, the courtyard between the pavilion and the tents. The interior borrows on the same narrative of the textiles, which are interpreted as hand-chiseled patterns on stone, as you can see on the wall on the right. This is also translated into this carved bar unit with migratory flamingos that visit the site in winter. The sundowner veranda overlooking the forest, the kitchen block made of reclaimed stone from the site, and the stepwell built around an old existing temple which blesses guests as they arrive and depart. Now, together with the owners, we found a way to keep the women from the neighboring villages actively engaged in the upkeep of the decor through traditional decorations in the landscape, inserts with mud and lime, such as these hand-painted rangoli patterns on the courtyards, and even the numbering of the rooms, all of which needs to get redone every few weeks. This is a video capturing the experience of being at the hotel. Thank you. So I'll move up back north again, the Himalayan state of Uttarakhand, where we are currently working. It's still ongoing, a passion project for a client who loves the hills and is developing an eco-conscious community on a 100-acre parcel of land. The biggest problem in these hills, as some of you might know, is the impact rampant, unplanned construction and torrential rain have had, causing severe erosion and landslides. And in spite of the heavy rain, ironically, a scarcity of water for human consumption, actually much like in Goa. Together with landscape architect Akshay Kaul, we developed an ecology-first master plan, mapping natural rainwater runoffs and green belts, around which we developed the road networks and the location for the built structures. This got translated on site in the manner in which the roads were cut, with minimal cut and fill, and very small, dry gabion retaining walls. Slope stabilization has been done using bioengineering methods throughout the site of hydroseeding, brush layering, and bamboo crib. For water retention and management, about 300 micro check dams of dry stone have been created across the swales on the site, which over a period of 3 years alone have not only retained water for the site, but have regenerated an entire system of underground aquifers and have even begun to recharge wells of villages much further downstream which were dry for years, creating a remarkable transformation. Now, the houses themselves are collection points for rainwater. We look at water as a community resource, not a private resource. So the water that's collected from the rooftop of one home will get used by the home downstream through a gravity-fed network. The wastewater too gets recycled and used in a similar network. Together with structural engineer Manjunath, we have managed to build in areas which are non-productive, on slopes, virtually impossible to build in traditional methods, through a construction technique with almost no cut and fill, with minimal alteration of the slope of the hill. To ensure the surrounding trees do not get damaged, we developed a low-impact method which did not need cranes or heavy machinery to move the structural system. By using a very strong basket-like weave of only 4-inch by 4-inch square steel pipes, such that each part that gets assembled is less than 100 kilos, enabling 3 to 4 people to build the structure by hand without the need for heavy equipment. The structure could be erected rapidly with the trees around all intact. Timber and slate forms the facade rain screens. To the right, you can see that the weave of this thin structure is expressed as the walls slice through. Hand-carved details in timber welcome you into the house. The outside and the inside connect strongly, both in connections with the courtyards and the way balconies perch out into the trees. The house encapsulated within the trees as it disappears into the forest, which was our primary intent. So coming back to Rajasthan, thank you. To a more historic site, this is the City Palace of Jaipur, where we were invited to do a small cafeteria within the precinct of the City Palace Museum. We proposed re-articulating the central courtyard by replacing a vestigial toilet block that had been built a couple of decades ago with a new connecting pavilion, which opened up a new entrance to the city so that the cafe becomes the connector for the palace to the city after museum closing hours as well. We began to strip layers of cement plaster, so this seems to be a recurring theme, and paint from earlier, very poorly done renovations to reveal the spectacular stone masonry beneath, which we repaired using lime mortar from pits we set up at site. Delightful transformations came about as these before and after pictures show. And the buildings started to speak of their history through their material heritage. We conceptualized a contemporary pavilion as an island that anchored the two courtyards. This also housed the bar, and crafted this out of a lightweight metal frame and handcrafted local marble, which was honed down to a fine thickness which made it translucent. It's not a translucent material normally, and creates a dialogue between, again, the old and the new proportions. Other craft forms, such as traditional hand-cut tikri mirror work, which is used extensively in old furniture and sometimes on ceilings and palaces, was reinterpreted into new, more graphic forms that find place through different zones of the project. Different weave patterns based on textiles of the region find their place on furniture, which all come together as a tapestry of texture and light. And this gives the city a new watering hole that looks to the future while celebrating its past. Thank you. We addressed a very different concern in the same city when Sunita Shekhawat asked us to build her a Haveli for her eponymous brand of enamel jewelry. There was already a structure on site which she had recently built, which she hated, and wanted us to bring it down and build a new building. The concrete structure was in really good shape. It was brand new. And even though we would have had more freedom and a much greater fee in building anew, we chose to look at the fact that could we do something by repurposing the existing structure. And in the process, we avoided emissions of more than 500,000 kilos of embodied carbon. The handcrafted stone facade echoes the Indo-Sasanic roots of the city's architecture, a synthesis of the Deco, Mughal, and Rajput styles, all of which have influenced the region at different points in time. This narrative continues to the interior. Thank you. The multiple retail zones are defined by frescoes done on the ceilings, but these are painted by miniature artists who usually work on an A4 sheet of paper. Finally, there's something I can connect with. It took several months of prototyping for them to start working on the scale and form that they were totally unfamiliar with. A lot of failures, and they managed to create spectacular hand-painted narratives which are inspired. Thank you. So these are inspired by the gardens of the region, and these are all, they were on scaffolding, and they've never done it before, so they're not fresco painters. And these populate the multiple zones as you meander through the store. The project actually thus becomes a contemporary handmade symbol for both the brand and the city, and the sustainability story is not even told, but it's embedded and embodied within the approach, much like I think what Rajesh spoke about with his forest. So we took this idea of circularity, of reuse, but to a new building where we began to explore the idea of something that could be reshaped as per emerging needs, because that is what was required for the project. It's a new visitor center at the Mehrangarh Fort in Jodhpur. We won a competition a few years ago, and this is being built as we speak. It should be ready in about 3 months. It is, for most part, a naturally ventilated pavilion, which kind of stilts off the rocky hill, such that it doesn't alter the natural terrain. Once again, this is a grid of slender metal and full-size, like 3-meter-high sandstone slabs, which allow for the building to be reconfigured with changing use. The construction does not use any glue or mortar or cement. The slabs are interlocked and pinned onto the superstructure, and aside from the waterproofing membrane on top, the building can be disassembled and reused as a modular system, and it's designed to last 50, 100 years, so it's not a temporary structure. In fact, over the course of the project, over the last 2 years, it has undergone 3 variations as the needs of the program have changed. So this modular steel structure is designed to take in stone panels that slide in, that are 10 feet tall, 2 inches thick, sometimes insulated double-skinned walls, sometimes brise-soleil screens that create this porous, ventilated space. There are interlocking shelves and window lintels that slide in as a system of components which can be disassembled if needed. The flooring consists of perforated stone slabs slotted to allow rain to flow through into the hillside. The project is perhaps a prototype which appropriates engineering and craft as a synergetic whole and proposes a system that is rooted in the region, yet creates solutions that are circular, frugal, and forward-looking. Over time, our work has brought to us a learning that moved us away from a classical determinist model where the architect or the designer is the author and directs everyone to follow their instructions to the last detail. We found that this allows lesser degrees of freedom for other stakeholders to contribute their slice of genius, as compared to a participatory model which is slightly more emergent, that allows multiple stakeholders to shape the final outcome, often producing a much richer product. This process needs our drawings and approach to be flexible enough to allow for ongoing improvement or contribution at each stage of the project, something that's pretty difficult but immensely rewarding. So then what becomes important is not the design vision of one person, but more a process that can engage and empower people deeply at each stage of the process. This is something we have also tried to bring into the organizational design of our studio over time. We realized early on that design driven primarily by principals or partners has limitations of excluding others, and looked at processes of collaborations which initially included other team members and clients. But over time, we've begun to start thinking of the studio as something that's alive beyond the walls of the office, as our values get shared and seeded in different stakeholders who become our partners in thought. For instance, we work extensively with our studio alumni as an extended network. I think a couple of them are here. Our consultants, our contractors, artisans and vendors, all of whom become participants in these shared values and process. The more boundaries we remove, the greater the innovation we are able to harness and include. To create common ways of working becomes critical, and we've articulated a set of internal principles that guide us as a team, more behavioral and at the level of being. There's a glue that binds all of us at each step. Each of these have been defined in some detail. I think they are on our website, but I'll give you a couple of examples. So for instance, trust as a starting point is critical for success. We believe that each person will strive to do their best if they are given an opportunity to do so. So our focus is then on creating the right conditions for this to happen within the studio and the project. And you can only do that when you view the people you work with not as a means to achieve your vision, but as contributors to the vision. This is something that has become a cornerstone for us, where we attempt to harness the genius of all the people who form this extended team. To illustrate these in action more clearly, I want to share one last project, where we had the opportunity to design offices for the Department of Agriculture, for the state government of Orissa, which included a farmers' learning center. We suggested to the clients that why don't we open up this facility to the citizens of Bhubaneswar, because it was in a beautiful part of the city. And we did so by lifting all the offices up and freeing up the ground plane to create a free flow space at the stilt level that connects to the street. Here, you can see the top 3 floors, which are offices, and the ground plane opens up to the street with shared amenities, with a library, auditorium, training rooms, cafeteria, gallery, and the gardens, which can be used for events, workshop, and for people to wander through well after the offices on top close. Before I move on, I want to dwell a little bit on something that's, I think, something we're grappling with currently a lot in our projects, this idea of adaptive thermal comfort, which came into play strongly in our proposal for this project. So while in India and globally, most current debates are on what standard temperature of thermal comfort should be set at from a heating or cooling perspective, the real question to ask is whether there is even such a thing as a universal standard. Should there be? When you look at people in this image, you can clearly see that the current context determines what's comfortable for them. The season determines what's comfortable for them. The indoors in relation to outdoors temperatures. When decisions such as these are made locally and regionally and seasonally, there are massive savings possible in energy consumption without big technology. For Bhubaneswar summers, we found this temperature to be roughly about 29 degrees Celsius in the summer, in the shade, with a slow-moving wind speed of 1 meter per second hitting our skin through slow-moving fans. We installed a night purging system for the building where the cool night air is flushed into the building after office hours. The building has thick walls and partitions, again with high thermal mass, which stores all this cool that gets pumped in at night. In the day, once temperatures begin to rise, the vents close, fans come on when people walk in, and the building itself acts like a giant cooling sink. Post-occupancy analysis has shown success in peak conditions to meet user comfort. Most importantly, the building consumes 1/3 the energy consumption of the green building performance targets for the year 2030 and a fraction of current green rating standards for office buildings. Here you can see, thank you. You can see the naturally ventilated corridors and buildings with this courtyard morphology, nothing new, timeless. The layer of identity was critical as this building was a symbol for the new Orissa. Orissa is an agricultural state. We derived our inspiration from the textile crafts of the region. We used 4 colors of brick representing different colors of soil of the state as solar louvers which shade the glazing of the building, which also creates a graphic expression that celebrates the region, moving away from the usual aspiration for a contemporary building through steel and glass. We convinced the government to give patronage to a body of regional skills and crafts at a much larger architectural scale. We were really fortunate to find a local architect, Sibanand Bhol, to run this part of the project, which was really difficult. We then set up the brief, created the canvas for him and his team to work on in the public spaces, and then left it to him and the artisans to own the project. For this to succeed, we had to let go of our control and trust the process. They created narratives around mythology, around agriculture, all related to the theme of the land and something that would be familiar to their fellow citizens. They hand-carved at sight with larger-than-life crop motifs, these condylite stone lotuses that were cast into the concrete roof slabs at the time of construction, to the way our engineering services shafts were screened, the Bastar metalwork of that region used as screens and lighting devices, as the building signage, how the building sits in context of the city. And I'm going to leave you with a film that captures the experience of our artisans who worked on the project.
We were quite excited, with the quantum of work that could be generated if artisans, if craft and architecture could come together. And I think that has been a big achievement, that this building project could generate work for about 50 artisans for a continuous 6 months. And we actually got artisans who had stopped working in the traditional skills. We convinced them to come back and to start working again.
काम करुले सेमती निर्दिष्ट गोटे ही कम भितर रही चिंताधारा से गोटे भितर रही निर्दिष्ट मूर्ति बनवारे चिंताधारा से भितर सीमित थिला जार फल यही कमटा कृषि भवन कम कर आम मानक देखागला प्रकृत में आम आम कलाटा को केमतिका अन्य दृष्टि भी देखिपर
It's a perfect setting for us where we could bring in artisans and craft. If you talk of farmers and if you talk about people coming from villages to this building, then we want to show them something that's familiar to their environment, and that is where craft comes in.
Thank you.